Whether you look at Egypt and Jordan, even Mexico, Malaysia, USA, yes, USA may be one of the most mature markets, but all the other critical markets in the world are at different stages, but they have already started the process. Transactions are taking place because they have started the process. So I don't think it's a fair statement to say that Saudi Arabia is far behind. Saudi Arabia is on its way if the proper attention is given. And I don't mean to paint a very positive picture. There are steps that need to be taken. But my whole concept is, rather than criticizing, we need to understand where we are so we can keep developing. One of the key things here from a global perspective is also to understand, well, what about the mortgage crisis? I'm sure everybody thinks about it, and especially since I'm from the United States, people say, well, you guys created a massive crisis. Well, again, it's a question of understanding what the crisis was. It's very easy to say there was a crisis and the world collapsed. The world didn't collapse. The world went through a massive correction at a philosophical level, a correction in greed. But at a transactional level, at an industry level, the correction took place because it was just not one sector to be blamed for what happened. Some people blame the greed on the real estate sector. Some people blame greed and ridiculousness on the government side. Others say the financial sector. But let's understand what happened. The financial sector and rating agencies lost the ability or diluted their ability to check credit, to manage risk. There are three important things here on the left: capacity, collateral, and credit. And I'll talk about that. They stopped focusing as bankers, as what they should, on the capacity of somebody to truly pay back a mortgage, on what the underlying collateral is and its value, the asset, and is the end customer credit worthy? Is it the kind of customer who has the character and the credit to actually be responsible enough and to pay back? Okay? That is something that has to be taught and used to be taught. That got diluted because there was so much money and people just focused on doing transactions and really building this facade of an industry, but that wasn't happening. Because of the need and the rush to do transactions, the financial industry came up with very risky products, and the rating agencies overlooked the risk of those products and said, yes, go ahead, do it. As long as you're creating massive pools of assets, you're great. The government was also to blame, and I think the primary reason was that there was not enough regulation of the financial sector and the non-banking financial sectors and mortgage industry. There was no regulation of that, or very little regulation, or lax regulation. The learning experience has been regulation is key. Homeowners, absolutely. Homeowners are to blame also, because education, proper credit management, money management education weren't there. Bankers and brokers were walking up to them and giving them loans that they couldn't afford. They were buying houses that were well beyond their capacity, and they went and fell for it. It was a greed towards quality of life that was unnatural. And then finally, developers and brokers, absolutely. They realized that the market was there. They realized that they were getting buyers who could not possibly afford to pay back these loans over 15, 20 years, but they still built for them. They built, and they thought they could run away with the transaction and forget about it. In the end, it's the financial industry's problem, but everybody realized it's not just their problem. If you sell your house to somebody who cannot afford to pay that loan back, then you lose that customer forever, because nobody will ever give that person a loan again. And your industry will die off. So understanding that, we need to understand where we are in Saudi Arabia. The mortgage law is a very important thing. Now in Saudi Arabia, if you look on the left, those are the different areas that the mortgage law covers. But the key thing that a mortgage law should cover, and what it should provide, is proper enforcement of the law. You can create all the policy laws you want to, but if you can't enforce them, there's no point. So enforcement is very important, and specifically in the case of, God forbid, foreclosures, where you have to take possession of the house because somebody is just refusing to pay. The other thing is recognition of a mortgage as a security, which is very important, because in the secondary market, if you're going to churn more liquidity and get more liquidity, people need to understand that the mortgage is secure against proper collateral, against proper credit, and they can buy this asset and give you more liquidity. And then enforcement in courts is one thing, but regulation by SAMA to check the industry, to check our credit procedures, to check our risk management procedures is also going to be very important. That's what the mortgage law should aim to deliver for the industry. And as industry practitioners, that's what you should look for too. Is the law going to deliver on those three summarized aspects? Finally, I'd also like to talk about, in this phase, liquidity. Because everybody says, where is the liquidity going to come from? This is where the government has to step in today. The government has to step in and create a mortgage liquidity center that will help provide liquidity to the sector, because there is an issue with banks today, as in any other country, because typically banks in these countries are short-term lenders. When you ask institutions to do long-term financing, they have to mitigate or think about their risk of doing that. They have to get liquidity other than the liquidity of depositors. Because as depositors, you probably don't want your banks to take long-term risk with your money either. So the government has to step in and provide and augment that liquidity to create proper liquidity centers. Now, we have a design on the left of liquidity center, but forget about the design. But what the liquidity center has to do is to tap into the long-term fund holders today, pension funds, GOSIs, public investment funds, or whatever they may be, tap into that liquidity, create a liquidity center, and they can profitably then supply that liquidity as wholesale financing to the sector. That has to happen. That is critical in any country, and it has to happen. And to work with the private sector as a liquidity provider is better than actually becoming a lender to borrowers. Now, we've seen in the case of the Real Estate Development Fund here, and it's just not in Saudi, everywhere else, where the Real Estate Development Fund was created by the government with good intentions to provide home loans to home buyers. But why is it that banks have zero default rates on their loans today in Saudi Arabia, and the Real Estate Development Fund has a double-digit default rate? Because the government should not be in the business of lending money. They have to be in the business of supplying and augmenting industries, but when you lend money and you only come up with one product over the last 30 years, and you don't have the proper risk management criteria and the systems in place, it's not your place to be lending. We have to get the private sector involved, the financial industry involved. We're good at what we do. We work with the real estate sector, and the mortgage industry has to be created that is part of the real estate sector that understands supply and demand and provides real affordability. That's what has to happen. So I've talked about the infrastructure and everything that happens. But then the question becomes, once the infrastructure is created, everything is done, how should the model work? How should it operate? And that's something that I think you need to touch upon. So the mortgage platform, when you go as developers or real estate sector experts and go and talk to a mortgage company or look to build a mortgage company or be part of a mortgage company, there's critical things that you need to understand about the platform vis-a-vis the market and its needs. The critical thing is to understand that the mortgage company is a connection between demand and cash, liquidity. It takes the proper risk on people who want to buy a house and provides them the financing to go buy it. So it evaluates the sale price of the house, the quality of the house, and the true value of the house. It evaluates the capacity of the buyer to pay back something and live in that house and own that house over time and not to have to leave that house midway. And in the end, it evaluates the cost of liquidity and prices it properly so that transactions can happen. Not pricing it so high inappropriately so that transactions don't happen, or pricing it so low just to do transactions that you create a bunch of buyers who will default over the few years and the industry will collapse. It is a tremendous responsibility, and it has to be looked at very seriously by people when a platform is built. The next thing, which is very important when I talk about this evaluation and process of giving credit, this is important that you ask every mortgage company